She stood in the middle of the crowded market, her hands shaking, her eyes darting from one stall to another. A single alien mother, dressed in torn clothes, tried to hide the hunger in her child's eyes. No money, no hope, only hunger that burned like fire. Her trembling fingers reached out and slipped a piece of meat under her cloak. For 1 second, she thought she had escaped, but then strong hands grabbed her wrist. The guard's voice boomed, "Thief!" The crowd turned, whispering, pointing, some laughing. Her child clung to her leg, terrified. She froze, her heart pounding, waiting for punishment. But then, the crowd fell silent. A human stepped forward, his voice calm, steady, cutting through the noise. "Wait, don't touch her." Every eye turned to him. The mother stared in shock. Why was a human defending her? And what would he do next? The market was alive with voices, full of colors and smells, but she did not see any of it. The single mother walked with her head low, her cloak tight around her thin body, her child holding her hand. Her child's eyes were wide, staring at the food laid out in front of stalls, the smell of roasted meat rising like a cruel reminder of what they had not eaten in days. She had tried every door, begged for work, begged for mercy, but no one listened. To them she was only another mouth to feed, another burden, a stranger not worth their time. Her little one tugged on her cloak, whispering that he was hungry, and her heart broke. She knew what she was about to do could end badly, but the emptiness in his eyes gave her no choice. She moved closer to the stall, pretending to look at the fruits, but her hand shook as she slid it toward the meat. The vendor was busy with another customer. Her fingers brushed against the cold piece, and in one swift motion she pulled it under her cloak. For one moment she thought it had worked, but then a rough voice cut through the air, sharp and loud. A hand clamped around her wrist, dragging it into the open, and the stolen meat tumbled onto the ground. The crowd turned, whispers rushing, like a wave, faces turning hard, some amused, some angry. They began to murmur the word she dreaded most, the word that would mark her forever: thief. Her knees weakened, and she tried to speak, but her throat closed. Her child pressed close to her, his small arms clinging, his eyes filling with tears. She wanted to protect him, but she could not even protect herself. The guard who caught her stood tall, his eyes cold, his grip unyielding. He pulled her cloak aside, showing her shaking hands, as if he wanted the whole market to see. Her chest rose and fell to fast, her breath shallow, her mind racing to the punishment she feared was coming. The crowd's whispers grew louder, crueler. She could hear them asking what should be done with her. She braced herself, expecting shame, expecting the end of whatever little dignity she had left. But then, the sound of footsteps broke through. The crowd, calm and steady, a figure stepped forward, moving past the murmuring people until he stood in front of the guard. He was human, tall, with steady eyes that did not look away from her trembling face. He lifted his hand slightly and said in a voice that cut through the noise, "Wait, don't touch her." The market fell silent, as if the words had stunned them all. The guard frowned, confused, but did not release her. The people leaned closer, whispering questions. Why was a human interfering? Why would he defend someone like her? The mother blinked, her lips parting, unable to understand. She had expected scorn. She had expected punishment, but not this. Not this calm, steady presence that looked at her not with anger, but with something else. Something she had not felt in a long time. Mercy. The silence stretched, heavy and strange, and the guard shifted uneasily under the human's gaze. The mother's heart pounded, her child still clutching her side, and she wondered what this stranger would do. Why was he standing against the crowd? What could he possibly gain from saving her? She had no answers, only questions rising inside her like a storm. The crowd waited too, restless and curious, their eyes moving from the trembling mother to the human who now stood between her and her fate. And in that single breath of silence, the future of her and her child began to change in ways she could not yet imagine. The air in the market was still heavy with whispers as the human's words lingered, and the guard, unsure of what to do, tightened his grip on the mother's arm but did not pull her away. The woman could hardly breathe, her heart beating so fast that it hurt. while her child pressed his face into her side as if hiding from the world. The human took one step closer, his voice calm but firm, and told the guard that the woman was not a danger, that she had only taken food because her child was hungry. The crowd gasped, some shaking their heads, others muttering that he was a fool for standing up for a stranger. The guard's face twisted with confusion, torn between the rules he was meant to follow and the presence of a human, who now stood like a shield in front of the trembling mother. The human bent down, picked up the piece of meat that had fallen to the ground, and without hesitation, he handed coins to the vendor. Then, as if to make his choice even clearer, he asked for more food to be wrapped, enough for both the mother and her child. The vendor obeyed reluctantly, his eyes shifting nervously between the human and the murmuring crowd. When the human placed the food gently into the mother's hands, her fingers trembled so much she almost dropped it. Her eyes lifted slowly, meeting his, and for the first time in what felt like years she saw someone who did not look at her as a thief or a burden, but simply as a person. She tried to speak, her lips parting, but no words came. The human only nodded, as if telling her she did not need to say anything. The crowd began to murmur louder, some angry, some confused, asking why a human would waste his kindness on her. The guard released her arm at last, though his eyes narrowed with a warning look that said this moment would not be forgotten. The mother pulled her child close, clutching the food against her chest, her legs unsteady as if she could collapse. At any moment, the human turned slightly, facing the crowd with quiet strength, and though he said nothing more, the silence of his presence seemed louder than all their whispers. Slowly, people began to drift back to their stalls, but the story of what had just happened spread like fire, carried by curious tongues that could not wait to tell others of the human who had chosen to help a starving mother instead of letting her be punished. The woman's child tugged gently at her cloak, his small eyes wide with wonder, not just for the food now in their hands, but for the stranger who had stood for them when no one else dared. The mother lowered her head, whispering to her child that they should thank him. But when she turned back, the human was already walking away, calm and steady as if nothing remarkable had happened. She hesitated, then hurried to follow her child, stumbling along beside her because she needed to know why. She needed to understand what had driven him to step into her despair and change the end she thought was certain. She caught up with him just outside the market, her voice breaking as she asked why he had done it. The human stopped, glanced at her, and for a long moment said nothing. Then, in words simple but weighty, he told her that no child should go hungry while others walked past pretending not to see. His tone was not grand, not loud, but steady and sure, and it pierced her heart more than any speech could have. She wanted to cry, but the tears would not fall, trapped behind years of silence and fear. She could only bow her head, gripping the food tightly, and whisper her thanks, though she felt the word was far too small for what he had given her. They walked together for a short while, and she found herself speaking without meaning to, telling him of her struggles, of how her husband had been taken away for speaking out, leaving her alone to raise her child. She did not know why she was sharing such things with a stranger, but the calm way he listened made her feel that maybe, just maybe, her voice mattered. The human said little in return, but his silence was not empty. It was the silence of someone who cared enough to listen. Yet as they reached the edge of the market district, the mother felt eyes on her back, a cold weight that made her turn. In the shadows of an alley, a figure stood watching, his face hidden, but his posture tense, as though he had seen everything that had taken place. The human followed her gaze, his own eyes narrowing slightly, but when he looked back, the figure was gone. The mother shivered, clutching her child closer, her earlier relief slowly turning into unease. She knew that kindness was never without cost in a world like this. She wanted to ask the human if he understood the danger he had placed himself in, but the words caught in her throat. The human, however, seemed unshaken, walking with the same quiet strength as before, though his eyes scanned the streets as if expecting more unseen watchers. The mother felt a strange pull in her chest, a fragile hope fighting against the fear she had carried for so long. She did not know what would come next, But one thought echoed again and again in her mind, that this human had not only saved her from disgrace, but had stepped into a storm that neither of them could yet see fully. The night came quietly, but the mother could not rest. She sat in the corner of the small room she called home, her child curled against her side, finally sleeping after eating more than he had in days. The sound of his breathing should have given her peace, but her thoughts would not let her close her eyes. Again and again she saw the human standing before the guard, his calm voice cutting through the judgment of the crowd, his steady eyes refusing to look away. She had not asked for help. She had not believed such help could even exist, and yet it had come, unshaken and unexpected. Her hands tightened around the cloth wrapping of food the human had given her, and her heart ached with something that was both gratitude and fear. Gratitude because someone had shown mercy. Fear because she knew mercy was rarely left alone. Someone had watched. She was sure of it. She had seen the shadow slip back into the alley, a presence that chilled her, even more than the guard's grip had. She tried to convince herself it was only her imagination, but deep inside she knew eyes had followed her, and eyes in this city often carried messages to places one did not wish them to go. The next morning she tried to keep to quiet streets, holding her child's hand tightly, but whispers followed her everywhere. People glanced at her, some with pity, some with scorn, but all spoke of the human. They said it was foolish. They said it was strange. They said no good would come of it. She kept her head low, though every word pressed against her chest like a stone. When she reached the market's edge, her steps slowed, for there he was again. The human stood by a wall, speaking softly with the same vendor who had sold the meat. His voice carried calm authority, and though she could not hear his words, she saw the vendor nod, his face uneasy but respectful. When the human turned and saw her, he gave a small nod of greeting, not like one greeting a stranger, but like one who already shared some hidden bond. She hesitated, unsure if she should approach, but her child tugged her cloak, whispering that they should go to him, and so she did. They walked together down a quieter path, and the mother found herself telling him what she had tried so hard to bury. She told him about her husband, how he had once dared to speak against the overseers who controlled their district, how he had been taken away and never returned. She spoke of nights with no food, of neighbors who closed their doors, of the endless fear that one mistake would mean the end for both her and her child. The words tumbled out, unplanned, and each one left her lighter, though her eyes brimmed with tears she refused to shed. The human listened in silence, his face calm but his eyes steady, as if each word mattered to him more than she could imagine. When she paused, he spoke only a little, telling her that survival should never be treated like a crime, that no child should have to suffer because of rules made to keep people weak. His words were simple, but they pressed deep into her heart. Yet, even as they walked, she felt it again, that sense of being watched. She glanced over her shoulder and caught the glimpse of a figure vanishing into a narrow street. The unease in her chest grew sharper. She stopped and whispered that someone was following them. The human did not look startled. He only nodded slowly, as though he had already known. His calmness steadied her for a moment, but the fear returned. Quickly, she asked him why he had helped her, knowing the danger that might come from it. He did not answer right away, but after a pause he said that sometimes silence is worse than risk, and he would not stand silent while a mother trembled in front of her child. The words burned into her thoughts, but before she could reply, a sound drifted from behind them, quiet footsteps, quickly fading as if the watcher had moved away. The human's eyes followed the sound, then returned to her with a look that told her everything. They were not alone, and this was far from over. She tightened her grip on her child's hand, her heart heavy with both fear and wonder. She had thought the worst moment of her life had ended in that market stall, but now she realized that moment had only opened a door to something far larger, something she could not yet see. And though she did not know what awaited, she knew one thing with certainty: the human who had stepped into her despair had tied his fate to hers, and because of that, their lives would never again be the same. The following days passed with a strange stillness that was heavier than noise, as if the whole city was quietly waiting for something to happen. The mother tried to keep to the shadows, guiding her child through side streets, avoiding the busy markets where people now whispered her story as though it were gossip, to be traded like coins. Wherever she went, she felt eyes on her, not only curious stares but sharp and careful ones, as though someone was keeping count of every step she took. Her child did not understand the tension, only clinging closer to her hand, asking softly when things would be safe again. She could not answer, and that silence was the hardest weight of all. When she finally saw the human again, standing near the edge of the square where merchants gathered, she almost felt relief. He had a calmness about him that cut through the restless air around her. But as she stepped closer, she noticed he too was alert, his eyes watching every corner, every shadow. That morning, soldiers moved through the streets more often than usual. Their presence was not casual. Their footsteps struck the ground in patterns that spoke of search and command. People stepped aside quickly when they passed, afraid to draw attention. The mother felt her stomach twist when one of the patrols stopped at a stall near her, questioning the merchant about a thief who had been caught and then released without punishment. The merchant's voice was low, careful, but the soldiers did not seem satisfied. They mentioned her description plainly, and her breath froze in her chest. She clutched her child's hand and turned away, only to find the human standing a few steps behind her. His eyes met hers, steady and certain. And then he stepped between her and the soldiers as if it were the most natural thing in the world. When the patrol noticed him, they paused, recognizing that he was not just another passerby. Humans were not usually challenged openly, and their authority carried a weight even here. One soldier frowned, asking what he was doing with her, why he was near someone marked by suspicion. The human's voice was calm as always, telling them that she had done nothing wrong, that she was under his care now. His words hung in the air like a barrier stronger than any wall, and for a moment the soldiers did not know how to answer. People nearby froze, listening, their faces reflecting fear and disbelief. The guard leader shifted uneasily, not willing to press further, but also not willing to back down completely. He gave a stiff warning that choices had consequences, that protecting someone like her might draw trouble, and then he ordered his men to move on. But the look in his eyes promised. This was not the end. The mother stood in silence, her chest tight. As the soldiers disappeared into the crowd, her child buried his face against her cloak, not fully understanding, but sensing enough to tremble. She wanted to thank the human, to beg him not to put himself in danger for her, but the words tangled in her throat. He looked down at her gently and told her not to be afraid, though his gaze was sharp as if he knew what storm was already forming around them. He explained that when someone shows mercy in a place built on fear, others notice, and not all of them wish for kindness to spread. His words unsettled her, yet at the same time they lit a spark inside her, a fragile reminder that even in a city of rules and silence, one choice could shift the ground beneath many feet. As they walked away together, the mother noticed people, watching from doorways and corners, their expressions unreadable. Some looked away quickly, afraid of being seen staring. Others held her gaze for a moment, as if measuring her worth differently now. She realized that what had happened in the market was no longer just her story. It was a thread in the fabric of whispers that now stretched across the district. And with the soldiers searching and strangers watching, she understood that her life and her child's had been drawn into something larger than survival. Yet as uncertain as it all was, she could not ignore the quiet certainty of the human beside her, who had spoken simple words, but carried them with a strength no threat could bend. In her heart, a question grew louder with each step. Why did he risk so much for someone like her? And what unseen path had his unshakable kindness opened for them both? The days passed slowly, yet each moment felt heavy with secrets that neither the single mother nor the human had the courage to speak aloud. And though they shared quiet meals together, a shadow always lingered between them, unspoken but powerful, like an invisible chain binding them in silence. The mother often caught herself glancing at the human when he was not looking, noticing the strange way his eyes seemed to scan the sky, as if expecting something or someone to arrive. And when their gazes did meet, he always offered a calm smile, yet there was something hidden deep in those eyes, something that told her he was carrying more than just kindness. One evening, when the night was quiet and the stars shimmered above their small shelter, she finally asked him why he helped her in the first place, but he did not give a simple answer. Instead, he leaned back and whispered that not everything in the universe is what it seems, and sometimes even humans hide truths too big to share at once. His words filled her with curiosity and fear, because she had always believed that humans were straightforward. Yet this one spoke with layers of mystery that made her heart both unsettled and strangely safe. The child, however, seemed to sense more than either of them admitted, often asking the human questions about the stars, questions too advanced for a child, and he always responded carefully, never revealing too much, but giving just enough to keep the child's mind racing with wonder. That night, when a sudden streak of light crossed the sky, brighter than any falling star she had ever seen, the mother panicked, but the human stood calmly, as though he had been waiting for it all along, and the calmness in his face only deepened her confusion. "It's nothing," he said softly, guiding them back inside. But she knew by the tremor in his hand that it was not nothing, that it was something far greater, and perhaps dangerous. She lay awake long after the child had fallen asleep, wondering what she had stumbled into when she met him, and whether his kindness had been fate or the beginning of a truth too vast for her fragile life to bear. The silence of the night grew heavy, almost suffocating, as she realized that no matter how much she tried to deny it, the human was not just a man who saved her in the market. He was part of something far larger, something that might one day demand more from her than she ever imagined giving. The night of unanswered questions stretched into dawn, and the mother awoke with a heavy heart, realizing that the fragile calm they had built could not last forever, for the world outside was changing, and the human who had saved her seemed less like a stranger now, and more like someone sent with a purpose she could not yet see. He rose early, his steps quiet, as if he wanted to slip away unnoticed, but her eyes followed him, and she asked softly where he was going. He paused, his back to her, and after a long silence, he said that sometimes helping others means carrying burdens that can never be spoken, and she felt a chill move through her chest, because his words sounded like a farewell. The child stirred then, rubbing sleepy eyes, asking if the human would be back before nightfall, and for a moment his calm mask cracked, showing something raw and unguarded in his face, before he bent down to promise gently that he would always return. But promises, she knew, were not always enough, and when he finally left, she felt the weight of something looming over them, unseen but certain, like a storm waiting at the horizon. That day, she tried to distract herself with ordinary things, but her mind replayed every look, every half-hidden word he had given her, until her heart ached with both fear and an unspoken trust she had not chosen, but had grown within her like a secret root. As evening came, she stepped outside and looked up at the sky again, hoping for peace. But what she saw instead froze her in place, strange lights moving in patterns no stars ever made, drawing silent arcs across the heavens. The child ran to her, clutching her hand, whispering that it was beautiful, but she knew better. It was not beauty, it was a sign. A sound came then, faint and distant, like the hum of something vast breaking through the stillness of the world. And though no one else around them seemed to notice, she felt every part of her soul tremble. She thought of the human's steady eyes, of the way he always seemed to be waiting for something. And in that moment she understood he had not simply saved her out of kindness. He had been preparing her, protecting her, perhaps even hiding her from something far beyond her imagination. Fear tightened in her chest, but so did resolve, because whether she was ready or not, the secret he carried was about to unfold, and her life, her child's life, would never again be the same.